Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, because I have a guest this evening. My name is Jerome Page, and we're here at week 4 of the 1960s Project. The 1960s Project is an activity or project that we've developed to share the thoughts and memories of those who were in high school during the 1960s. That means those who were in high school between 1960 and 1969. This is our 4th session. We've been remembering, recalling, and reflecting. And I want to thank everyone who's joining us this evening, and also to encourage you not only to watch the broadcast, but to find the submission that our guest has made and read what she has to offer and share any comments that you might have. So our theme is Tiny Thoughts and Large Memories. And these are tiny thoughts and large memories from the lives of those who were high school students in the 1960s. Our guest this evening completed high school in 1969. There were a couple significant historical events in 1969. One, in 1969, there was the development of something called ARPANET, ARPANET. And that was the predecessor to what we now call the internet. So in 1969, researchers at UCLA in California and Stanford in California sent what we would call the first text messages. And from there, here we are today, 50 some years later, streaming and doing all kinds of things over the internet. We've heard a lot in the news about the protests, particularly among athletes, Black athletes, and focusing on protesting the murder of Breonna Taylor, supporting the kneeling of Colin Kaepernick. But there was also in 1969, 14 African-American athletes were suspended or kicked off the University of Wyoming football team for wearing black armbands. Back in the 60s, the wearing of the black armbands by Black athletes was a symbol of protest, just like today there's the symbol of kneeling. So we see, when we'll talk about this with our guests, some of the events seem to be recurring time and time again. The number one chart hit for 1969 was by the Temptations. And that tune was I Can't Get Next to You. And we'll talk about that tune as we move through the session. So what I'd like to do is now welcome Sharon Pugh to join us. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Jerome. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
You're looking mighty upbeat and vibrant. So you're happy about the whole thing.
Be glad when it's over.
Okay. Okay. So Sharon, you were in high school in the years 1966, 1967, 1968, and 1969. What high school did you graduate from, and where was it located?
Calvin Coolidge in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And I graduated from Germantown High School in 1965. And Germantown High School is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So do you remember the Temptations too? I Can't Get Next to You?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Temptations were one of my favorite groups.
Oh, can you have any lyrics that pop into your mind?
I'm not going to sing any, but
Okay. You don't have to sing them.
But I don't know. I like most of the Motown stable of singers. Four Tops also.
Okay. Well, the Temptations started in 1960. So they're clearly a 1960s group.
Right.
And so so they spanned the 1960 And before COVID, I was in New York in Broadway play and saw the play about the Temptations' life. And that was old people singing along, patting their feet in the audience. So but there have been something like 24 or 26 Temptations since 1960. And only one of them is still alive.
Right.
And that's the original founder, Otis Williams. So a little tidbit, and our hats off to him. I think he must be.
I thought it was Melvin, not Otis.
Huh?
I thought it was Melvin.
No?
Go ahead.
No, no, I think, well, somebody will fact check this on that.
I'm sure they will. Okay.
So, all right. So, what did you feel when you wrote that it's been 51 years since you graduated from high school?
Well, I don't know. I've been going in bits and spaces and starts and spurts. During COVID, I think it's just been a matter for me of reflecting. And I'm not a journal keeper normally, but I started doing what I'm going to call a journal. And just started reflecting on different things. It started with reflecting on how I felt as a result of the pandemic and the isolation and the social distance we were all keeping. And then as things moved on, you had the racial incidents of the summer, but it wasn't until the George Floyd murder that I kind of exploded in anger. And I think it was just such a visceral reaction to that. A friend of mine sent me a text asking if I was okay. And
why would a friend send you a text asking you if you're okay?
Well, this is a non-Black. This is a white woman who I'm close to, and she, I guess, understands. We've had some discussions about race and always about politics, clearly. But she kind of understood. In the group, there's a circle of friends I have where I am the only Black. And she's part of that particular circle. And she just reached out to me. And I think it was a reaction to her as well of just how far we have really gone and how ridiculous and crazy and mean and hateful all of this is. So she was reaching out to me in the sense of my reaction to the murder. Am I okay, given the racism that had been just broadcast over, the front page and the news everywhere? My reaction to her, my response to her was to write a letter. I wrote a letter conveying all of my encounters, I guess, with racism, be it overt or covert, and a questioning of racial identity that I've recognized from a child throughout my childhood. And then I think with the 68, I think that was the summer before my senior year. And actually I was a junior in high school when Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered.
Yeah. Let me stop you there, because that's how you start your essay. You start your essay with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Okay.
So why was that significant for you?
I think it's because of all the riots and the protesting. That was the first time, 68 was the first time in my memory that we had the riots here in DC, and they were traumatic. I remember the day King was assassinated. My father, we came home from school, okay, coming home from school. My neighbors across the street who happened to be Jewish, when my father came home, they were like, "Oh, we're glad you made it home." Because downtown was burning. He had to come home from work through downtown. And, it was just something else. It's the first time I had ever considered, recognized, I guess, the militarization of local law and order. We had the National Guard out on the streets, on the street corners, downtown, not up here. You could see the smoke rising from downtown as the city was burning. So that was just etched into my mind. And it was that same feeling. There was that same feeling I had as a result of the George Floyd murder and seeing it. And then just the reaction, across the country with the riots, people rioting, and particularly in Minneapolis.
So you in your essay, you said as a result of the King assassination and the events around that you began to develop your racial identity.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? What were you before, and then as the result of the assassination of King and the unrest that followed, what did you become?
Black.
You became what were you there before? What were you before?
I was probably Negro or colored. I don't know. I think at that time we were still Negro. We hadn't accepted Black yet. We may have been African American. I'm not quite sure. But it was really, I think, when we became aware of the Black Power movement. I think it was more because of the student movement, primarily at the college level, where they were at the same result, kind of protesting against Dr. King's nonviolent movement. So they were countering here, nonviolence doesn't work, so we're going to be violent. And that violence kind of resonated with me a little bit. It was just a release of the anger, and I don't want to say hatred, but just the anger with America, anger with society, and we're not going to take it. And in the high school I was in, I was a junior, there were some seniors who were very hip, if you will, and they were into the movement at that time. I had not joined the movement. I was not aware. I was aware to some extent at a distance, but I wasn't involved. I wasn't engaged in it. I'll put it like that. I was aware, but I wasn't engaged. And I think as a result of the protests here in DC and the riots and everything, particularly at Howard, that, it opened my eyes, and it's like, now I've got to do something. I've got to recognize who I am. We're not alike. And I think a lot of it also had to do with, I hadn't really experienced racism personally in my life before that. I've heard about racism. I knew about segregation. I've encountered segregation, but to me, the racism was a little different, and I didn't experience racism prior to that.
Did you go to a racially integrated or racially segregated high school?
When I started Coolidge, it was very much integrated. We had a white principal. There were still several white students there, and we had a variety. We had white students, we had Asian students, we had Native American students. So it was a very, very diverse school.
Was it diverse by design? Was there a busing program, or how did it be? Why was it diverse, or how did it become diverse?
That was the neighborhood school. We didn't have busing at that time, but the boundaries, and I think also the neighborhood was diverse that I lived in. So it drew from a mix of middle class neighborhoods that were mixed. A lot of Jewish community was involved in it, as well as a lot of white communities that were majority white at that time. But over time, between my sophomore year, which is the 10th grade, the first year of high school here, and my senior year, all of that changed. The neighborhoods were changing. There was more of the white flight. The principal became, the new principal was Black. And actually some of the kids the non-Black students who were in my class, DC has a program, you could do accelerated studies, and quite a few of them went to summer school to take the required junior year English and I think history, so they could skip the junior year and just come back in as seniors, where most of us came back in as juniors, so they could get out of school. And quite a few of the white students took advantage of that program that summer.
So when you graduated in '69, was your graduating class predominantly Black, or was it mixed?
It was predominantly Black by that point.
Okay. When you mentioned that you went back to your 50th high school reunion in the summer of 2019, what was the racial composition of those who showed up at the reunion?
99% Black.
Okay.
And that was the first. I had only been to 2 high school reunions, my 10th and the 50th. There were none. Everyone at the 10th was Black, and the majority, I would say 99%, at my 50th were Black.
Okay. What was it like stepping into the room 50 years later, and seeing your classmates?
Well, I didn't recognize most of them.
They didn't have COVID then, so they didn't have on masks.
They didn't have on masks. Didn't need the mask. I still didn't recognize, and it was like, I was surprised. There were some people I have seen through the years and have encountered and kind of kept up with, so I knew them. But the vast majority of people I just did not recognize. And, they're just changed, and we've aged, some of us better than others.
Well, how many people ask you look just like you did in high school? How many people said that to you?
Not many. Not many, but I was recognized. Everybody recognized me. But I just felt like I was at a disadvantage. I'm looking at name tags, trying to figure out who these people are. And I see a name and recognize a name, but I can't put the face to it. So it was really awkward for me. And then there was one woman. We had kind of a 2-night thing for our reunion. We had a general get together on a Friday evening, kind of a happy hour, if you will. And then on the Saturday, we had a dinner dance. And so that was kind of formal. But the happy hour get together, everybody was very loose, and it was just a gathering, and people could bounce around from table to table to table or whatever. And there were some people I kept looking at, and I'm like, I know who you are. I know you, but I don't know who you are, but I know you. And eventually it was like, oh, okay. So it was disconcerting.
Okay. Did you feel 50 years old?
Sure, I felt 50 years old. I mean, my God, I was going on 70 by that time. So yeah, feeling 50 was pretty good.
Well, you also mentioned that most of the people who showed up at the high school reunion seemed to have been professionally accomplished. Their lives professionally had turned out well. When you were in high school, you were torn by which direction to go. If we use terminology today, you were torn between being STEM or being STEAM. STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. And then after they added the A to that for STEAM, for the arts. So you had a STEM career very early on. Can you describe that?
Well, I'd always been oriented to science, chemistry, sciences, and math came natural to me. And I excelled at those subjects. They were easy for me. And, so I'm like, okay, that's what I'll do. I would always expect to do that. Somewhere along the line, I decided I was going to become an engineer. I had an uncle who was an electrical engineer. So I decided I was going to be an engineer. And when I got into high school, for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to go into chemical engineering. And that's what I wanted to pursue. Now, you say STEM and STEAM. I don't say STEM and STEAM. I say STEM and just plain arts. At that time,
what was your arts part of STEM, or your plain old arts?
Well, I mean, arts was the music. And at that time, I did not connect music or the arts with the STEM programming, if you will. Later, I did come to realize that it was very much comparable and compatible.
And what was your art? What was your musical training, or what instruments did you play, and how far did you go in learning music or studying music?
I started with piano at age 5 and had piano lessons all the way through high school. I started the violin in the 3rd grade. And then in the 7th grade, we had a class of violinists and the teacher wanted to mix it up. So he demonstrated the viola and he demonstrated the cello. And the cello just hooked me. I was hooked on the cello. So I decided that's what I was going to do. So I played cello through junior high and high school. And that was what I was going into Oberlin with, in the conservatory, majoring in cello performance. And also,
you mentioned Oberlin. What is Oberlin?
Oberlin's a college in Ohio, Oberlin, Ohio. It's probably
is it predominantly black? Is it HBCU?
No way. No, it's not an HBCU, but it has a rich history of being an early admitter of Black students and also of women. It was one of the first co-ed schools to admit women. But no, it's definitely not an HBCU at all. It is predominantly white. It has always been and probably will always be. I think at the time I enrolled, the Black enrollment may have been maybe, I don't even know if we were 1%.
Okay. All right. So you had to choose a major at some point. Did you go to STEM or did you go STEAM?
Okay, I went STEM. I enrolled in STEAM and transferred to STEM.
All while you were at Oberlin?
While I was at Oberlin, I was enrolled at the conservatory. Oberlin is divided into 2 schools, the Liberal Arts College and the Conservatory of Music. And I was enrolled in the conservatory for 1 semester. By the time, and I never wanted to do music as a profession. And by the end of the 1st semester, I had made up my mind and had taken action to enroll into the Liberal Arts College. And I enrolled as a math major. Okay.
So your professional career was in the science, and how would you summarize your professional career?
And basically science-based, but also there was some policy orientation. I ended up, I didn't graduate from Oberlin. I returned home mid my junior year and went to George Washington University. And there I switched from theoretical math to applied math, which is very different, and also physics. But I also, GW had an engineering school, so I took a lot of engineering classes. I had several engineering courses under my belt by the time I graduated. So I started my career. I was in competition with the engineers at that time, and I started my career in engineering, although I didn't have an engineering degree. And really at the time, I was torn between doing aircraft engine design and textile manufacturing. And I ended up going south and doing textile manufacturing. And I was
going south?
Yeah, North Carolina, Shelby, North Carolina. South Carolina.
That seemed like a, how did it feel being in the South?
It was a rude awakening.
In what way?
Well, I was naive. I had relatives who lived in Greensboro, and we would spend a lot of time there. And I had a lot of friends who had gone to school in the Durham and Raleigh area and Chapel Hill. So my familiarity with North Carolina really was the Research Triangle area. I wasn't prepared when I went to southwestern North Carolina. The closest city really was Greenville, South Carolina, although most people would go to Charlotte. And I just wasn't prepared. It was interesting. It was a 24-hour manufacturing plant. I'd never worked in any kind of environment like that before. So you had shift workers. The decorum was very distinct between the professional staff and the hourly staff or the plant workers. You the professional staff, you had basically a 9 to 5, although depending on your project, you would have to come in during the night or on the weekends occasionally, which I did. But most of the people there were also from Southern schools. You could have had a local alumni association of either Clemson, Georgia Tech, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, North Carolina State, all right there, in South Carolina. So I was an oddball in a lot of respects. There was one other guy who was from Maryland, University of Maryland, so he and I became close.
Well, let me ask you this: were there many women in the plant, or at the facility?
Not in the professional ranks.
Okay.
When I got there, I was in what they call the technical department, and I was one of 4 women, and I was one of 3 women and one of 4 blacks, and I was the only black woman.
Okay.
So it was
you talk about that in your essay, and I would encourage people to read it. Let me ask you a couple more questions before we wrap it up. But so you cover a lot of things in the essay. You talk about being in high school. You're talking about being a twofer in the case of going south, being black and a female. You talk about your professional career. But looking back, how would you sum up your life in Washington? I know you had some concerns about the political restructuring of the city. And so looking back from 1969 until today, what's your take on the political environment in Washington, D.C.?
It has definitely changed, and I can't say for the better. Just like everything else, history goes in cycles. Washington's politics is recycling back to almost, it seems like we have home rule, limited home rule. And it wasn't until 1974 that DC residents were able to elect their own local officials. We could elect, I think, the president, and that was about it.
And we could elect they could elect the school board prior to city council that came before.
Okay, I didn't know if it was elected or just appointed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But with home rule, people were able to elect, and it was really the self-governing. And at that time, drawing on the heels of the Black Power movement, there was a new vanguard that came into power, really. The old vanguard had been established. They were traditional Washingtonians, native or either long-term Washingtonians who were very, very middle class. And so there was a new vibe that was coming in. Most people remember that Marion Barry, I think was probably the second or third elected mayor that we had, who also had been active in SNCC, had started a self-help program here for youth called Pride Incorporated. So he was very much an activist, and brought a lot of inspiration, I think, to Black residents in the city of all strata. Whereas before, I think it was really concentrated just in the middle class, the upper middle class, the Black elite, if you will. But Barry opened up the government to everybody. And made people really feel welcome, but that has changed now. That has kind of gone back. We have a Black mayor, but I believe probably 95% of the agency heads in DC are white. Most of the cabinet is white, as well as the staff. And one of the things is we have what's called, there are different institutions, there are local institutions in DC outside of the federal government who very much control the happenings and the activities of the city. We have the Board of Trade. We also have what's called the Federal City Council. And we have the Committee of 100. And these are primarily businessmen they're basically business people who comprise these organizations who really are behind the scenes making decisions. And the current mayor is pretty much in line with them, I think, and does their bidding. And it doesn't help that at one point we were under, even post home rule, that we had a congressionally appointed financial control board that oversaw.
We'll have to pick up this discussion about home rule. I don't have time to challenge you on some of those points, but
I'm sure you would.
I would add that if people haven't had a chance to read the book called Chocolate City by Musgrave and Ash, they do an excellent job of explaining the evolution of home rule government. One of the things I learned reading that book, I guess I wasn't aware of it, but when Marion Barry came into power in DC, it basically was a transfer of, it became a SNCC-led government. Most of the major appointees for the Barry administration were out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so it was an opportunity for activists to become government, and we can assess the legacy of that and what that means. But that's for another day and another topic. Can I invite you back and we can debate home rule and its effects?
Sure, Jerome, anytime.
Well, looking back, what would be your message to young people today? And we'll close with that, your reflections on that. What would be your message to young people today?
Just be open. Keep your mind open. Be open to what's going on. Be open to all opportunities and ideas, because you never know where the seed will be planted, that can, steer you on to greatness. Look into everything, do whatever you can, do everything you can, in participating as much as you can, whether it's organized activities or unorganized activities on your own. And just, I would say, be true to yourself, know yourself. And that was one of the difficult things for me, I guess, is finding out who I am.
Have you found it?
Oh yeah.
Do you know who you are?
I know who I am now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sharon, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank everyone else for joining. You can read Sharon's submission on there's information on the screen there to access it and read it. And please share your comments. If you're interested in submitting your own stories, your own narratives, we welcome those. If you were in high school during the years 1960 to 1969, we're interested in tiny thoughts and big memories. And Sharon, you have quite a fan club going on in the text box. Our former neighbor, Pat Reed has chimed in. Pat Reed has chimed in. She's a former neighbor of ours. Linda Edwards has yeah, and O'Kella Trice, O'Kella, my sister. So Rita Morin says, excellent, thank you for sharing. And James chimed in and said, thank you. So thank you again, and everyone. This is the 1960s Project. My name is Jerome Page, and you can find us on Facebook. We also have a website, and please join us again next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Jerome.